Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, my brothers and sisters. Hope everyone's having a good weekend, inshallah. Today is gonna be a heavy topic, so I would recommend you to prepare your coffee, your tea, your Red Bulls, your Monsters, any energy drink. Then, as usual, we will play the video that is related to this topic. There were many videos regarding this topic because it's a topic that interests Brother Shahid, and this is his major, the way how to perform change in today's geopolitical landscape. So that's why there's this emphasis on this topic specifically. Try to listen carefully, inshallah, because we will try to go into detail about all of the things that are being said in the video. So it will, inshallah, help you give some background to what we will be discussing. And yeah, enjoy.
Well, I think there's a lot you can do. I think that there's, once you can establish, first you have to try to establish, or you have to try to cultivate in the population, in the public, the feeling or the understanding that they have a right to expect their dollars, their consumer dollars, to buy for them, to purchase for them, to secure for them, more than simply the item that they're buying. See, this is the trick that they've got everyone fooled about. They've made you think that when you spend your money on this shirt or that jacket or that handbag, whatever product it is, that whenever you spent your money on that, then you've got your money's worth. But you haven't. You haven't at all, because the profit margin for that product, you don't even know what the profit margin is. That product may have been made for pennies overseas. That product may have been made for pennies in a sweatshop. It may have been made for pennies in a factory in Vietnam or in Indonesia or in Bangladesh or where have you. And the company that's selling to that product is making a huge profit margin. You understand? So the actual value of the item that you're buying is considerably less than what you're paying for it. So what else are you getting for your money? That's the question. What else are you getting for your money? And a better question is, what are they using your money for? What are they getting out of that excess profit? What are they doing with that? You have to understand, like I've said time and time again, companies, corporations, multinational corporations are political entities, and they have political power, and they have considerable power over the daily lives of the common people. They have considerable power over the economy and the decisions made in the economy and how to manage the economy. And they have considerable power over even legislation and policies that don't even directly have anything to do with them sometimes. They have paid lobbyists, sometimes multiple paid lobbyists, and PR firms and so on, to get what they want in Washington, D.C., or in London, or in Paris, or in Berlin, or wherever else. Let's just say, for example, you buy something from them, and the actual cost of production for that product, the actual cost of production for the item that you're buying, is maybe a third of the actual price. The cost for producing the item is maybe a third of what you actually pay that company in order to buy it. You understand? So the price is marked up by 2/3. Well, what are you getting by giving them that money? Because you need to be getting something more than the handbag. You need to be getting something more than the jacket. You need to be getting something more than the shirt. You need to be getting something more than whatever the product is that you're buying, because you're paying considerably more for it than it's worth. So you need to start getting your money's worth. You need to start demanding that you get your money's worth, because they're getting your money and they're using it for something. What they're using it for is power. They're using it to increase their own power, their own economic power and their own political power. But they're not using that power for your benefit. They're not using it with your interest in mind. And you have every right to expect, just like if you went to a dinner, right? A dinner for a political candidate. We all know about these, right? That it's say $200 a plate. Well, we all know that the meal isn't worth $200. The meal is maybe worth $15, maximum maybe $20, $25. But you're paying $200 to attend that dinner, because everybody understands what you're doing is making a political donation. You're making a campaign contribution to that party or to that politician. Well, that's the same thing when you buy a product that's worth $15 to make, but it costs $200, or it costs $250, or it costs $70, but it's only actually worth $5 or $11 or $12. So there's a markup. 2/3 of what you are giving to that company is a donation. 1/3 of it is the price of the product. Roughly. 1/3 of it is the price of the item that you're buying. So now you need to demand from those companies, I should have a say in what you do with the other 2/3, because I know that you're using that 2/3 to further your own interests, and they're not supporting my interests necessarily. They may even be counter to my interests and the interests of my community, the interests of the target demographic that you are marketing to. You think that we should just be satisfied with this handbag or this wallet or this necktie or this jacket or this hoodie or this sweatshirt or what have you. We're supposed to be satisfied, and we're not supposed to ask what you do with the rest of the money. So what are you doing with the rest of that money? I know at least some of what you're doing with the rest of that money is paying for political lobbyists. I know at least some of what you're doing with that money is influencing politicians, is influencing legislatures, influencing chambers of commerce, influencing local, state, and federal governments. I know that you're using that money to get your way, but we as consumers have a right to expect you to use that power that we're paying for. We have a right to expect that you will use that power in our interests and in ways that reflect our values. We have a right to expect that. So you have to, first you have to try to establish this mindset, this mental change in the public, in the population, for people to understand that they have every right to expect that. The same way that if you went to one of those political dinners and you spent $200, for a hamburger that is actually just a political donation, a campaign contribution. The hamburger is not worth $200, and you know it, and they know it, and everyone knows it, and it's all agreed that you're paying that much money so that you can have influence with the politician, so that when you call him, he'll answer the phone, so that he will be answerable to you, so that he will be accountable to you, because you funded his campaign, you funded his career, you funded him being able to get into office. So you have every right for some quid pro quo, expect something back. But they've gotten us fooled into thinking that corporations don't owe us anything. They're overcharging us, and they're taking political donations, they're taking campaign contributions, they're taking charity. That's what it is. They're taking charity. When you overcharge to that extent, that's a donation that you're getting from the consumer, because what you're giving them is worth considerably less than that. So we have a right to expect that we should be able to call you, and you answer the phone. You can't call Bill Gates and he'll answer the phone. You can't call Elon Musk and he'll answer the phone. You can't call Larry Fink of BlackRock and expect him to answer the phone. Why? Why is that okay with anyone? Why should that be fine? If you give a campaign contribution of a significant amount, and if you're a regular contributor, a regular donor to a politician, you better believe he'll answer the phone when you call. He'll answer the phone smiling, happy, asking, what can I do for you today? But you can't do that with these CEOs and these owners of corporations, even though you're giving them donations and contributions every day of your life. So I think it's about time that we start to hold them accountable. I'm not saying that you have to lower your prices. I'm not saying that. Keep your prices as high as you like. But we understand, the people have to start to understand that markup constitutes a political campaign donation. We are funding your political lobby. We're funding your political power. We're funding your economic power. We're financing that. So you owe us. And you owe us more than a handbag. You owe us more than a hoodie. You owe us more than this little, sweatshirt or what have you. Just like when you spent $200 for a plate at a campaign dinner, a political dinner, you know, and the politician knows, and everyone knows, that you're not paying for the hamburger. You're paying for the influence. But we need to understand that that's what we're paying for. And we should start to expect to have that influence that we're paying for. Otherwise, they're just going to have the influence that you're paying for them. You're funding their power and expecting nothing back from them. That needs to change. I think it's time for that to change, because you should actually have power. You're paying to have influence over a major corporation, whether you know it or not. They've just fooled you into thinking that you're not buying influence, or that you're not paying for them to have influence, but you are. Because why on earth would you spend that much money for one of their products when the actual cost of that product is a fraction of it? It's a donation. You're giving charity to these corporations, but expecting nothing in return. So once you can establish in the minds of the public that they have every right to expect accountability from multinational corporations, from these huge companies, that they have a right to expect that their brand loyalty and their consumer dollars and their consumer spending, they have every right to expect that that should earn them and that should buy for them, that should purchase for them some influence with what that company does. And I'm talking about what that company does in the society, what that company does in terms of how it uses its political influence. That political influence should be employed to serve the interests of the people who are funding it, which is you and I. We are funding their political influence, but they're only using that political influence for their own ends and for their own interests. What's more prestigious? To have a luxury brand item that you can walk around and show your friends that you can afford it, and you have that item, you bought it, and you're carrying it around and showing it off to everyone. What's more prestigious, that or actually having power and being from the movers and shakers, being someone of influence, who when you call the CEO of that company, he answers the phone and says, "How are you today? What can I do for you?" Because you have every right to have that power. So there's many things that you can do. And once you establish this mentality in the population, in the public, then yes, there's many things you can do. And they're all steps in the right direction, inshallah. It's all steps in the right direction. And don't think that any step is useless just because that one step doesn't get you to the finish line. It's a one step at a time. And once you have that mindset in the population, once you have that mentality in the culture, then it opens all sorts of possibilities, and all sorts of people can come up with different tactics and techniques and strategies. I mean, for example, why couldn't you demand, say in the United States or in the UK or Europe or wherever else, why can't you demand, if you can demand honesty in advertising, if you can demand honesty in labeling in terms of ingredients and so forth, if you can demand all of those things, why can't you demand that companies should disclose their profit margin? Why don't we have a right to know that? But they're afraid, because they're gouging us in terms of the price. And if we actually know how much more money we're giving them than is the value of the product that they're selling us, then they'll know that we'll expect something from that. We'll expect that money to buy something for us more than the product, that it should buy for us some kind of influence and some kind of a say in the decisions that that company makes with its power. So they don't want to disclose that, but there's no reason at all that I can think of why they shouldn't be forced to disclose their profit margin. Tell me this is the price, and this is what it cost us to make it. You do the math. This is the profit margin. Is it 10%? Is it 15%? Is it 50%? Is it 75%? Is it 200%? How much more money are you making off of this item than it cost you to make it? Because that all of that money that's in that profit margin, that's money that we are using to fund you to have power. So every dollar on top of a reasonable profit margin, everything above that should buy us influence. I mean, you could look at the demographics. Say you start a website, for example, to organize and educate consumers. Start a membership where you can get people to sign up for it, understanding what the purpose of this is, to motivate them to sign up for this. And they'll sign it up, and when they sign up, they'll have to fill out a survey that will compile data about each member that you can then collate with the demographic data that is used by different companies in different sectors to identify their target demographic, so that then you could potentially organize. You could separate out, you could create small groupings within the total pool of consumers that you have in your database. You could have groupings that this group of people from our consumer database fits the target demographic of such and such company or such and such sector. And then you can mobilize those people in some form of activism for whatever it is that you want that company to use its power for. What sort of legislation you would like that company or the companies in that sector to use their power for. What you want them to use their lobbyists for. We want your support for this or that legislation, for this or that policy. We want you to back that. We want you to use your lobbyists to back that policy. And everyone who is involved in the activism, everyone who's involved in the organizing to appeal to that company will be taken directly from their core demographic group, their target consumer group. So you organize people along the same lines upon which those companies do their targeted marketing, so that you can say, you can't dismiss us. This isn't just a haphazard, random, disorganized sort of campaign. These are your customers. This is your target demographic, and they're asking something of you, and they have every right to ask something of you because they're your loyal customers. They have brand loyalty, and now they're expecting something back for that. They're expecting some kind of reciprocation on the part of your company to represent their interests and to use your power and your influence in ways that adhere to the values of your target demographic consumer group. Why can't you do that? There are so many things that you could do, but the first thing that you have to do is just get this into the mind of the public that you have every right to expect that you have every right to expect that corporations should be held accountable and should be responsive, and that they should use their power in the society to represent your interests, and they should exercise the power that they have in society in ways that reflect the values of their consumers.
Okay, mashallah. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, because it completely gives a different perspective on how to have a say, right? Usually we are learned, or they teach us that, go vote, right? Go to the ballot, you'll make a change, make yourself feel important, you're part of the decision-making process. But in reality, your wages are what determines what is going to happen, which policy will be taken. Every dollar you spend, that's basically the vote that you're making. So, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا ورسولنا وحبيبنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Okay, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So, in today's era, right, where we are dominated by these multinational, transnational corporations, this globalization, global capitalism, we still need to discuss how to decolonize, right? So it's very relevant, right? Because it's not just in the context of nations reclaiming somehow their political independence, but also how we as individuals, as societies, how we interact with economic systems, how we interact with cultural systems. Because all of this is really, it's just layers and layers of colonization, which are very connected with each other, right? And the three areas of middle nation that are always emphasized, which is first of all, economic sovereignty of course, first and foremost, Muslim countries, political independence of Muslim countries, and lastly, which is intertwined into these two sections, is this psychological decolonization, right? Because whenever we speak about decolonization, it's not just the physical colonization, right? How they occupied our lands, but it's about everything, really, the worldview, how it has infiltrated this mindset, right? And subhanallah, like when a person reads, of course, this is a bit for Muslims, but non-Muslims as well, but it's very alluded to in the Quran with the Bani Israel, right? You see how even when they are in the desert and they left the slave system of the Pharaoh, the one who was enslaving them, they still have this psychological colonization in their minds, right? They still remember the food from Egypt. They still remember the gods that they worship in Egypt, right? There is still this effect that even though you are khalas, outside of the land, outside of the control of this colonizer, you still are mentally subjugated somehow, right? So we need to target this one, and the best way we can target this, we did it already in some of our previous content talks, alhamdulillah. We have spoken about all of these types of misconceptions, right? About the economic system, about the prosperity that they have, about the democracy. We have addressed this blame shifting mechanics, right? The roots of their thinking from this survival mentality, right? Their approach to life, their baseless values, their worldviews, everything, about this society, this Western civilization, quote unquote, we have somehow addressed, right? And then we started to discuss the consequences of this approach to life, right? And this is mostly manifested through this approach of their policy, right? And the so-called democracy that they present so much, right? And going through this, we have seen how it's basically all influenced by corporates, right? How it's really just business, right? There is no democracy. All of the policies that they take, that's corporate policies, right? And we spoke about this in the facade of the democracy videos and the content talks related to that, or the funneling of money from APEC and different groups and so on. So we ended up with this understanding of corporatization of democracy, right? The democracy has been corporatized. But now we will try to shift to a practical reversal, right, which is democratization of corporations, right? If we cannot influence, or if it makes no sense to try to target the democratic parties, again, quote unquote, right? Whenever I say democracy, please just imagine that I'm, using my two fingers to make a quote. But we understand that all that we can influence is these corporations, right? Because then the corporations influence the policy. So our best shot is to try to somehow target these corporations, try to influence their decision-making processes. So we must begin to understand somehow in today's talk, inshallah, how consumer habits, consumer spending, what is their impact on corporate power, right? Because as Brother Shahid said in the video, our choices have really huge potential to somehow reshape the economic landscape, and through that, of course, the political landscape, right? So again, this, it's a part of decolonization, right? It's not just about trying to influence policies, but it's also trying to get rid of this whole Western cultural, like it's a whole movement, right? It has different layers, different aspects to it. Of course, in the video, it was mostly speaking about this influence on policy, right? How to make the most use of the money that you are spending. But there are also different, especially nowadays with respect to what is happening in Palestine and so on, people try to move not just because they are financing a genocide, but it's also, rejecting this Western culture, Western logos, Western brands, trying to, focus on our companies that are built by people from our homes, right? Trying to support them, support local businesses. And this can then help them, of course, inshallah, to become some influential stakeholders in national policies, right? To be some sort of a challenge to the external influence, right? The external multinational corporations. Like if we start diverting these finances from these huge, enormous corporations that are, ruling every country, we can try to support our own businesses and make them have a say in this. So, Bismillah, all of these three middle nation objectives, as I said, are very connected. So we have to approach the current reality for what it is, right? We need to be objective, okay? This is always the point that we are talking about. It's all about objectivity and trying, ummatan wasatan mentality, right? Middle nation mentality. So the power lies with corporations, and we have to shift our attention from the political sphere onto the corporate sphere, right? As I said, and, based on what Brother Shahid has been saying, each dollar we spend is a ballot vote we cast. So understanding in this fight, each act of resistance, no matter how small it might be or how minuscule you might view it, it does chip away at these entrenched structures of exploitation, right? And they try to, it one by one opens up the possibility of a different system, right? A system that is built on some bigger justice, right? Some equality, equity, and even the positively impact the society that these corporates are working in. So, I would like to ask my fellow speakers, my beloved speakers, inshallah. Sorry, just before I start, we will try. I will try to, inshallah, manage this discussion in four different parts. The first of all, we'll try to understand this need for corporate democratization, right? But we will try to really see the bridge between the consumer influence and the political power. Then, of course, I'll try to somehow look at different strategies. Of course, all of this is based on what Brother Shahid has suggested in his videos and what he has been speaking about. Okay, so yeah, we'll try to look at different strategies of how to democratize this corporate accountability, right? How to promote some bigger transparency. Then we'll try to look at different examples, especially in relation to what has been happening the last year and a half, 2 years, with respect, of course, to Palestine and so on. So with Starbucks, McDonald's, and there is also some issue with Balenciaga and many different, strategies from around the world, inshallah. And lastly, we'll try to take into consideration some ethical considerations, right? Because there might be some people that are harmed in this process. So there is some balance that needs to be maintained, inshallah. So this is just an overview of how we will conduct this talk. So, first of all, why is it necessary to discuss this democratization of power, right? Why is it even why should it be part of a debate, right? When, traditionally in public debate, in political activism, it's usually everything about the politics, which party you vote for, which, is it the Democrats? Is it the Republicans? Is it the Greens? Is it the right? Is it the left? Right? Always these kind of talks. We never hear about, are you voting for BlackRock? Are you voting for, State Street? Right? It's always like diverting the attention, right? So why do you think that it's necessary to talk about this topic that we are discussing? Right? And of course, resulting from that, how has this shift of power dynamics changed this landscape, right? Because okay, maybe 300 years ago, 400 years ago, I'm not sure with the Dutch East India Company and so on. I think these were just the predecessors of BlackRock, etc. So it was always the decision in the economics sector, right? But how have the last 20 years influenced this change? Yeah, so please feel free. I feel I've been speaking for too long, and I don't want to take time of my colleagues. So please, whoever feels you can address why this is important and why it's necessary to discuss this rather than political debates. Feel free to speak up, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So I think the reason why it's important that we discuss, influence and how our influence or how we can influence corporates as well as them then in turn influencing policies where government level is concerned. It's important because firstly, when it comes to voting within a democracy, by the time you voted, the decisions have been already made for you in any case. You are just deciding which actor is going to be there in front that you're going to speak to. So it's already decided what it is that they are going to do on your behalf. You are not making a decision by voting for a change within policies. You are voting just for a face, basically, an actor, so to say. So that is why it's important that we, the ones that are spending money every single day, put our money by organizations or with or behind corporates that will actually make a change or that will influence government and policies and that type of thing on our behalf, that work for us as opposed to for themselves and for the government. That is why it's important that we have these type of discussions right now. So even those companies and those corporations that seem to not be interested in politics, that it's such a dirty word for a lot of people. It brings all these types of emotions where, it's even part of the company policy where you can't even discuss politics. It's a dirty word, like I said. So even those companies that don't seem to want to get involved in government, but have the values or that represent the values that we, the laymen, want to see within our government, if we can even encourage those corporations to actually, because they already have the finance, because we are already spending our money with them, to actually take it further and to do or influence the way that we want to see the influence. So I think it's important that it goes both ways, not just us as a collective, ensuring that we do finance the right businesses, but also those same corporations that they take it further, not just, sit with our money and just work towards profits. And at this point in time, I also want to make a difference or make the distinction or the distinction between the difference between corporate democratization as well as or against corporate social investment. You do have companies that have all these non-profit organizations or all these good causes that they fund, and then they write a little article, put it on the website, write press releases. That's all relationship management. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about those companies that will actually go forward, go and go to government and influence there for the betterment of the country, for people in general.
Thank you very much, sister. MashaAllah. Exactly. Like we have to understand that these entities are no longer just commercial entities, right? But they are really significant political actors, right? And they have this immense influence over economies, over legislation, and thus, of course, over our daily lives, right? Yeah, please, Brother Omar.
Okay, thank you so much, Brother Kareem. So one answer to the question of why we should be paying attention to corporates in the past 20 years is that I think that throughout human history, this is the most consumeristic era of humans ever. So not in any time has consumerism prevailed the world over in the rate that it has prevailed in this time and day. And this was in part enacted by the corporates because they wanted to increase their profits so in drastic numbers. And in so doing, there had to be political decisions that had to be made. So wherever there was no need for a market had to be created, and methods were employed. Some of them were extremely brutal in many cases. These methods had to be employed to create markets. So it would be a grave mistake to underestimate the role of these corporates and the role of their market creations in many parts of the world just for the sake of profit generations and for the sake of um, satisfying their shareholders. So they have forced themselves to be part of the equation, whether we like it or not, and to uh, sit in the corner and convince ourselves that it's merely a political game and that corporates are not political entities because they choose to or because they have to. It doesn't really matter at this point. It would be a great mistake. You would not be confronting the issue in the right way, and you would not be solving it at all. So that's what I think I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Yeah, exactly, mashallah. And yani, the most important aspect is that, like there are very hierarchical structures of these corporations, right? It's not like you will stop buying from the supermarket and BlackRock will go bankrupt, right? But if if you look at some brands, right, like, I don't know, Nestle and so on, then you have again above it some conglomerate, right, of Unilever, and you have these like 150 200 brands below it, right? It's very, and of course they watch every part of these brands. They have their own analysis: what is being sold, what is the demand, what is the perfect consumer. They tailor all of these ads, they do all of this research, right? We have to understand that their only measure, their only purpose of existing is profit, right? So you have to be able to see their weak points and then try to target those, right? So of course, these boycotts that we saw and so on, they had effects, and inshallah we'll go into specific examples and look at the consequences, but it needs to be done with some bigger framework, right? And within some bigger framework, within some bigger idea, within some greater approach to how we try to influence public policy through corporates, right? Brother MG, I haven't heard you yet. If you want to add something, please.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So I would say that the problem also is that there are politics within the management of these companies themselves, and a lot of us have worked in companies before. The higher up you go the corporate ladder, the more political it becomes. And what this essentially means is that if you have views within the company that are anti-profit, or not anti-profit but more altruistic, you are sidelined. When you are inside this bubble or inside this domain, you are basically considered a person whose sole function is to increase the profit and the profit margin of the company. There's no freedom inside the corporation. The only language they understand in this situation is financial freedom and leverage. And within the lens of the corporation, there's only two types of people that are free. So those who have everything, who can buy countries, and those who cannot even afford a bank account. So anything in between, they are subject to leverage, subject to influence, subject to pressure. The question is, how much power does the consumer have? And also the competition that is more ethical, how much leverage do they also have? Because you could find yourself in a situation where company A that is supposed to be boycotted or is acting unethically might want to try to buy company B that is having an increase in profit. So there's also the threat of monopoly. So this is something that we should think about as well, and how to assess and study that further. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. And especially exactly like we need to be, as was mentioned, right, objective. And like the approach that we are taking, it's not seeking to somehow dismantle corporate power, right? We are like not communists, and give it all to the laborers and so on. Like it's not about that. It's just trying to somehow, reorient, right, the interest of these corporations, influence their orientation, right? So it's not just for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the societies that they are working in, right, or that they are dependent on, basically. Like this approach tries to somehow ensure that the consumer spending, it actually translates into some political influence, right, and that the corporations become somehow responsible or accountable to the consumers that they're dependent on, right? So again, it's a very how to say, like pragmatic, I would say, maybe approach, or practical really approach, right? And of course it's a very long process, right? It's not something that happens from day one to day two, but it's over a long period, step by step, organization, some collective will, and inshallah we can create this more balanced system where the corporations basically benefit the communities and individuals will sustain it. Yeah, please, brother Omar.
Yeah, just a small point to add is that accountability is not only to the customers, it's also to the employees and the workers of these companies. Um, we need to understand that corporates are, just like Brother MG said, they are hierarchical institutions, and there are huge disparities within these entities. Meaning that the profit, like he said, the higher up you go, the more political it gets, but also the more revenue you put in your pocket, while people at the very bottom are not looked after very well. And I think all of our speakers already know of instances of companies like Amazon and many other companies in the e-commerce sector, for example, where where the working conditions for workers are notoriously dangerous, and it's not a very hospitable environment. So accountability has to be to the consumers and to the workers in the company as well. Just a quick point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, brother NG.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to the corporate ladder, I mean, at least that's from my perspective. I don't see that even those that are in the higher end of the corporate ladder, I would consider them as financially free. I mean, they are still under greater level. They are still under greater leverage and greater influence and greater pressure, because at the end of the day, it's the owner. It's the owner of that corporation that is exercising the leverage and the influence. It's not those who work, regardless who's on the corporate ladder. I mean, it's not. I mean, obviously, of course, those who are at the lower end of the corporate ladder get paid less. You can say that they work harder, but also the decisions they make, they don't have the how their decision does not the magnitude of decision does not affect the company as much as those who are at the higher end of the corporate ladder. So there's a reason why the payment can be higher the higher up you go. It's just the disparity is crazy sometimes. That's the only problem. But here, when I'm talking about politics within the corporate ladder, what I mean is that the owner plays a big role and is more politically motivated when selecting the employees in the company that are very high in the corporate ladder. So that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
I actually do understand that. I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. It is important that the owner or the board of directors, or whoever it is, the decision makers, the real decision makers, should have the same values that align with the public. So we need to, as consumers, make conscious decisions to only support those businesses who we know the decision makers are transparent in what it is that they do with the company, for the company, as well as for the country within where they're operating. So the video mentioned transparency, and that is key. That's the only way we will know if we are working with the right business, if we are supporting the right business. It is important that they value real transparency, not just saying the mission statement that they're transparent, but be really transparent about who they support, who the political parties are that they're working with, all that type of thing. Those are the important things that we want to know. So yes, it is about the decision makers, and those are the people that are sitting on top. They obviously are the big earners. I wouldn't agree that the people at the bottom work the hardest. I'm not going to. I'm just saying that I don't think that is always the case, because people have different roles in life. So, but that's not the topic for today. But I wholeheartedly agree that the decision makers on top, their values need to align with our values.
I want to focus on the social societal impact of corporations more than on the internal ethics of any particular company, or the internal degree to which the employees or the executives have principles. Brother pointed out, and I think I pointed out in the video, I think we all know corporations are about making profits. That's what they're about. They're about making revenues. They have a responsibility to their shareholders to make money. So the point here is to what we have are these mammoth institutions, these mammoth organizations that are authoritarian in their internal structure, that possess enormous wealth and enormous power over the conditions in the cities and towns and states and countries where they operate, which comes down to they have enormous power in controlling and determining the conditions of the everyday lives of people all around the world. But they have no accountability to the people, to the populations, to the countries, to the towns, to the cities, to ensure that those conditions are good and in the interests of the population, because they are the system has created these monster institutions that by their nature they become incredibly powerful, but also by their nature they are psychopathic in their exclusive pursuit of self-interest. So this is an incredibly dysfunctional way of approaching things. Now there's not much we can do about the internal logic of how corporations function. That's the model that they have. So what we have to do, like what you said earlier, we're not talking about overthrowing corporations or taking corporations apart, although there's certainly an argument to be made about whether or not incorporation itself is a rational thing to allow. But it is what it is. This is our approach, and as you said, it's a pragmatic, strategic approach. We don't believe in collapsing or overthrowing any power structure, regardless of what form it is. We believe in strategizing to ensure that whatever power structure we're talking about is responsible to the population and responsive to the population, and not exclusively self-serving. So that the onus is upon us to try to figure out how we can utilize whatever the internal logic is of that power structure, that institution. In this case, we're talking about corporations, the most powerful non-state actors, political actors in the world. How do we navigate the internal logic of those institutions to include in their logic serving the public, or anyway considering and trying to better represent and reflect the values of the population and the interests of the population? That's what is meant by corporate democratization. I think you've outlined it very clearly. We're not necessarily talking about, although it's certainly an aspect of it, we're not focusing now on the internal ethics of any particular company. We're talking about the relationship between these massive, monstrously powerful institutions and the population. Because America came up with a really brilliant, ingenious way to completely circumvent the democracy that they committed themselves to on paper, by saying, okay, we'll say on paper that we have this democracy and that it's a government of, for, and by the people, and so forth. But power won't be with the government. Power will be in these massive institutions that are not democratic in any way whatsoever. Actual, real existing power will belong to the private sector, where there's no democracy whatsoever, and no one gets to vote for that. So that it ends up coming down to whoever you vote for, the right or the left, the Republicans or the Democrats, all you're doing is electing who will get to serve the interests of the private sector. That's what your election is about. And people need to turn their political activism, they need to turn the focus of their political activism towards the private sector, because those are the most powerful political actors. And until now, mostly what we have done is focus on politics and the government, which ends up being, I'm sorry to say, a really wasted effort, because all you're doing is deciding who gets to be the one who gets to serve private sector power, and who you're electing someone so that they can later on down the line get a chance to be on the board of directors of a powerful company and serve the interests of a powerful company and get a job after they do their term in the public sector. So we need to organize, and we need to mobilize, and we need to strategize on how we can impose democratic accountability. Don't be triggered by the terminology, because I'm not really talking about democracy. I'm talking about responsiveness, making these institutions responsive to the public, accountable to the public, so that they will serve the interests of the public and act and use their power in ways that reflect our values. That's the core idea behind corporate democratization.
MashaAllah, brother. Thank you very much for this, and especially the point about exactly who will be on the board of directors. Like, we essentially spoke about this in some previous content talk, alhamdulillah, that anyone who you elect, they are just gonna do stuff in the government to be able to secure a seat in the board of directors. Yeah. So please understand that the political serves the corporate. It's not vice versa. Right. So this is a very key distinction that one needs to have in mind, where the flow is going from, right, and who is serving who. And once we realize this, we understand who to target and through who we can make some change. Right. So yeah, please, brother MG.
Well, one way to take an approach is through financial and non-financial disclosures. But then the problem is BlackRock actually plays a big role in companies having to do that. The question, and if they are going to stop that, the question is, how are we going to get these companies to disclose both their financial in terms of profit margins, as Brother Shade said in the video, but also the non-financials, how their activities affect society and the environment as a whole. So it's a strange it's a strange situation where is it the chicken that came first or the egg that came first? Because also you have governments that are under the great influence of these corporations, but at the same time there's also the pressure for their own people to see basically the outcome of the people they quote unquote elected. So it's a balancing act. And we need what we need is that starting point. That starting point of transparency. That starting point of their supply chain being disclosed to some degree.
Well, the thing is, like, when you speak about what was first, the chicken or egg, it always also came to my mind, subhanAllah, when we were speaking about this, putting the politicians into the board of directors, etc. But we have to understand that the root of these corporations, right, it was one thing, right? The ruling class was the economic class, like 300, 400 years ago. That was, the political and economic power were one, right? But then they tried to start to do this facade, even though, like, it's not something that has been divided or like different, separated in some sense, that they try to present it. The thing is that these monarchies and these great families that were the ruling families, the ruling class, they are the ones who basically were the source of these corporations existing, right? That's at least in my opinion, that's how I view it. So I do not think that there was one thing that came first. I think they were simultaneous, but then through the capitalistic mechanism and their form of capitalism in the Western democracy, this is what gave birth to these like BlackRock, etc. Right? So I wouldn't view it too distinctly, but just that the ruling elite now, instead of being like a royal family, it's now a royal corporation, right? We can say, or something like that. So I hope now, after having spoken about these type of the core understanding of why target the corporations and so on, I think now, because you, brother Shahid and MG, alluded already somehow to how can consumers influence, which strategies can we use or make use of to democratize the corporate accountability, and how to even increase the transparency, because I see that this word has been thrown out a lot, but now transparency about what, right? So building on this understanding of why it's essential to democratize, again, as Brother Shade said, when we use democratize, just understand that it means how to make them accountable and responsible, right? Again, as I'm just reiterating what has been said. It's not about, again, blue or red or left or right, right? It's just about the essence of the word, right? Somehow. So how can consumers demand meaningful accountability for corporations, right? And just beyond simply avoiding their products, right? What are the mechanisms or which tools can give consumers a voice in corporate governance, right? And in their, lobbying practices. And as you mentioned, the transparency, what kind of transparency should be demanded, either regarding the profit margins or their lobbying activities or their political influence, like which, community-driven measures could enforce this, right? So if you have any ideas, feel free, brother MG, please.
Yes, so I think one of the things that we can look at is, for example, how I don't know if anyone has been following the news lately, that the BDS movement, they are collaborating with the mobile application Boycott. So one of the challenges of community-driven actions is that the community itself is preoccupied with their own daily life, and we live in the digital age, the age of technology, where everything can be accessible with our phones, and it's very difficult back in the day, before. I mean, if you're a millennial, you would know, or before that, you would know that we lived at a time where technology didn't play such a significant role as it does today. That when you wanted to boycott something because of because of certain unethical practices, it was a bit challenging because there's a lack of information and a lack of flow of information. And so I think a good starting point is when you start to see applications like Boycott taking this initiative and helping people while they go shopping for groceries, to shopping for cars, or shopping for clothes. These applications would help people make more ethical decisions. So I think this is a good starting point when it comes to community driven, and this will push indirectly companies to start becoming more transparent in their disclosure, whether that's financial or non-financial. Yeah.
I'd also like to add that it's also important. I know we spoke about large corporations, but a lot of these large corporations obviously don't align with what it is that we want. Which also means, because they've all been operating the way that they've been operating for decades, and what we currently see at the moment. So we need to make a start, and it also starts with small businesses aligning or supporting small businesses that that business owner is wants the same things that you do, and in doing so, firstly, you are building up that business in order to eventually have that influence, but you're also removing the influence and your money from the current corporation that has the influence already. So you're shifting power in that sense, and it has to start at some point. So the best way, I think, or another way, or one of the ways to do this, is to shift the power to small businesses that align with your values. It's important. I keep saying that because it's important that we understand that we want certain things done a certain way, and that we need to lobby or be behind those businesses that will kind of like represent us, because we know our vote doesn't matter. It's not like we can go make a change. We need the people with the money to do that, and we need to spend our money the right way, and that also starts with the small businesses.
Well, I mean, originally, corporations. First of all, everyone who's living in this generation, even my generation, corporations is just a thing that exists in nature. That we just take it for granted that this is a thing. But even agreeing to grant incorporation for the creation, for the existence of corporations, is a relatively new thing in history. And just as brother was saying, this is just a new sort of strategy by the ruling classes, by the upper class, in organizing their money and consolidating their wealth. But originally, in the United States, incorporation involved strict oversight and accountability. There were mechanisms for ensuring. It was started by, I believe, at least in some states, by state legislatures. Incorporation was granted by state legislatures for specific purposes and for limited periods of time that you would then have to renew. The incorporation charter would be revoked if the corporation was found to be acting against the public interest, or if it failed to fulfill its stated objectives, which always had to include something in terms of benefit to the society. Committees or legislative review boards would assess whether corporations provided benefits to society, which is a stark contrast to the way it is now. But that's the way it was. And if they found that the corporation did not benefit or disproportionately harmed society, then incorporation was revoked and they couldn't renew it. Now, over time, by the late 19th century or so, corporations had worked their way into the control over politics, control over state legislatures and government and so forth, so that the laws became more permissive, and we arrived at the situation we are now, where corporations can just, once you incorporate, there's no accountability and there's no limited time period and there's no review of your societal impact. But there's no reason why that has to be the case. There's no reason why there can't be some accountability. There's no reason why there can't be a similar practice on an evaluation, a total evaluation of a company's impact on society. And if it's a multinational corporation, then that would involve an evaluation and a review of their impact. And it doesn't. And when I say their impact, I'm not just talking about the ethics of their supply chain, but the actual impact that they're having on countries around the world where they're operating. or in cities around the country where they're operating, or in states, or what have you. But I don't see any reason why any society, particularly in the West, where they consider themselves to be democratic, I don't see any reason why any society should accept to have these massive, powerful, rich entities existing in the society without them having any accountability whatsoever to the population.
It's very interesting, especially this historical development, like how you mentioned that by the late 19th century, give or take a couple of years, that was basically the era of where they started infiltrating the political landscape a lot. And I think like the most kind of transparent influence on policies is like the 70s and the 80s of the 20th century, right, where we have seen all of these, like really all of these neoliberal policies that just purely benefit the corporate sector have been enacted during that time, right? We saw it in the movement of like Margaret Thatcher in the UK. We saw these different policies in the US, right, even related to like the banking sector, the investment sector, the investment banking sector, like all of these sectors of the economy started to be so, just to benefit the corporate sector, right? And as you mentioned, they even have their own like legislative framework, right? Which is really crazy. Like individuals, if you're in debt, you are going, to jail, or they're going to come after you, right? If you're a company, well, you announce bankruptcy and let's, make another company, right? So you can already see that there is really very different approach to, accountability of corporations, right? And how they basically manage to somehow, even the legal framework, to just make it, fit their own purposes, fit their own functioning. Yeah, so this seems very interesting to me, to be honest, like, and how even is it possible to be that way? So, subhanallah. But yeah, I like
that you mentioned. I like that you mentioned the fact that accountability these days is in the form of creating another company that is for the benefit, basically for capitalism. For example, you get better rebates and tax cuts and all those things depending on the neoliberal policies that they are trying to push. Like, for example, climate change. We've got the solar power going thing, electricity crisis, all those type of things. It has a lot to do with benefiting profits more than it is about benefiting society. And those type of agenda is probably not maybe the nicest word to use, but whatever. So it's those type of projects and those type of causes that really get the push when it comes to corporates. And it's something that I mentioned earlier, their CSI strategy, those you'll typically find those type of things in their strategy. It's the solar power, it is a little non-profit organizations, but it could be their buddy that has started the non-profit organization. So it's more about actually just shifting money from one end to the other, as opposed to actually benefiting society. It probably benefits a smaller amount than what it is supposed to look like what it is doing.
Yeah, exactly, mashallah. So, let us just try to focus on the steps that consumers can practically, take. So first of all, what Brother Shahid mentioned in the video, there needs to be some awareness about this, right, within the public. Like, if 100 people know about it or try to think about it in this manner, it's really hard to make any change, right? So first of all, I think even we as, consumers, we as people, like even when people talk about, voting and who, like, let's try to, educate people. Let's try to let them understand, like, do you really think that's where the power sits, right? Let us try to approach it in an educational manner, right? Try to cultivate this awareness within the public. It makes, I think everyone who is here and listening to this, like, it makes complete sense. Right? There's nothing controversial that we are saying. There's nothing that would seem, what are you talking about, right? Kamala is gonna liberate me, right? Like, I think we are being very practical, and it's a very straightforward approach that we are discussing right now. So it's not gonna be hard if you understand what is being said to be able to convey it to your, family, to your colleagues, to people who give too much preference to the political system, who give too much, emphasis on the politics. Just let them know that it's not that way, right? Try to make them see the reality for what it is. Please, Brother Omar.
Yeah, regarding the question of how to increase awareness. So educating people. So in our day and era, images are everything. So I believe that content that is specifically focused on the money flow. So and this is what Middle East is already trying to do, but I'm talking here about corporate. So, yeah, so it can be said like that corporate level PR producing images that there has to be content that explains the whole money cycle. So I remember that Brother Shahid a couple of videos ago detailed in very specific detail how the money flows into the private sector when people go and endorse this or that candidate for any public service. And you just have to convince people that you have to show people that the money does not flow into any meaningful aspect, into any meaningful laws being enacted, or into any public services. You have to show them the numbers, and to show them the charts, and to show them purchasing power, and you have to show them increases in sales and so on and so forth after important events like the coronavirus, for example, or after a certain war, or after a certain epidemic, or after a certain construction of cities, or disruptions of regions, and so on and so forth. So they have the saying, which is called, follow the money. So all we have to do, it's of course not simplistic at that. I mean, the bottom line would be that we should ask people, the general public, to follow the money, to see where the money will actually end up, and that will, I think, things will be downhill from there, because people will instantly know where their money ends up and how it ends up being used against them in most cases.
Inshallah, Brother Omar, very nice points. Please, Brother MG.
Yeah, to build up on Omar's points as well. I mean, we can say in an idealistic scenario that there's, generally speaking, that there should be a financial disclosure on corporate donations for politicians who are running for office, or running for parliament, or whatever, and that these disclosures have to be publicly displayed on every poster and billboard they post on the street, with the percentage of how much of these donations are corporate, and how much are actually from the community that they are supposed to represent. Now, of course, that's idealistic. It might not be applicable for a lot of places, and but maybe an out-of-the-box solution could be, for example, how they have the new, how you see on social media, the APAC tracker, when they're tracking different American politicians, for example, on how much money they get from APAC. Maybe there could be like some sort of application where it basically breaks down every politician's donations from A to Z, something that is more comprehensive, and that does it through, I don't know, maybe some sort of AI detection of the picture, and then it just does the in artificial intelligence format, it pulls up everything about that politician, and creates a graph with a pie chart with the percentage of the donations, where it's coming from. Is it coming from Raytheon? Is it coming from Big Pharma? Is it coming from whatever? And basically, while you are walking into the election booth, you at least have a comprehensive decision on who to choose. I would say strategically, because you might not necessarily choose the person that is serving your interest, because that would be difficult. But at least you make the strategic choice that yields the outcome that perhaps might be in your favor. So I'd like to finish my point on there.
But I think lots of
I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, but just kind of going back to the point of, we're not actually sort of demanding an end to corporate power, because I think that's utopian. That's sort of delusional. These are massive, powerful institutions that exist, and they're not going away. All we need to do is try to make them accountable to us, to the population. So I don't have a problem with corporations having the influence that they have, because again, this is just realism. It's just another form of a permanent situation in human society, in the human condition, which is that the rich have more power than the poor, and that there are ranks of influence within a society. The point here is that the people at the upper ranks of power and influence are able to wield their power and influence with complete disregard for the population. This is the issue. It's for me. It isn't even about. Of course, I mean, what MG is talking about in terms of the transparency of we want to know to what extent this corporation or that corporation has been funding this or that candidate. And we should also, for example, we should also have disclosure of any meetings that they have, private meetings that they have with politicians, senators, parliamentarians, what have you, prime ministers. We should know all of those things should be public. I mean, they gather all of our data. The flow of data is only going in one direction. The so-called public servants, we don't have any of their data, but we should have all of their data. They have all of ours. They know who we're talking to. They know where we're going. They know where we check in. They know who we're chatting to, but we don't know anything about them. So it's all going in the wrong direction. We should all of that should be disclosed. And that's for the purpose not of saying you don't get to have power and influence, because that's inevitable. They are going to have power and influence. But the purpose of that is to make sure that their power and influence is used at least not against us, at least not to harm the population and not to harm the society, but ideally so that it actually serves the interests of the society, or at least reflects the values of any particular company's core demographic, core consumer constituency, which is what we should call it. If you're a consumer group, a consumer demographic group that's targeted by this or that particular company, well, you're their constituents. You are supporting them, as I talked about in the video, and as Brother Kareem has talked about. You are when you shop at a store, when you are using the services of this or that company, when you're paying for this or that or the other from this company or that company, you are endorsing them and advocating for them to have more political power. So you have a right to expect them to use that political power in ways that reflect your values as their core constituent, because you're the one who's giving them that power. So I think that it has to be understood. We're not talking about, well, we need to reduce corporate power, because I also think that ultimately it can be in our interests. If we have the ability to influence those influencers, then that amplifies our influence. And this is sort of removing the curtain of so-called democracy, where we think that by our vote and by our support of this or that campaign, we are somehow being represented by these politicians who are only ever representing the private sector. Then we should just go directly to the private sector and make sure that the private sector is representing us, and then they'll make sure that the politicians represent us. It's a relatively clean system. But the thing that's missing right now is that we don't have any link between us and corporate power that allows us any leverage, which is to say, we're not aware of the leverage that we have. So I think the transparency and disclosure are all very important. But I think that most people, certainly in the United States, I think most people do already understand the power of the private sector and do already understand the power of corporations and the corruption of corporations and the disproportionate power and influence and leverage that they have. And the more we emphasize that, in one way, that's educating people. But I think most people are already aware of it. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Everyone knows that. This is just a truism of life that everyone has accepted. But what we need to educate people on is their position and the opportunities that they have, the connection that they have to the power that corporations have. People need to be educated because they understand the power the corporations have, but they don't understand their role in that. And so there's a kind of a hopelessness and a despondency of these massive mammoth corporations just have all of this power and influence, and we're nobody, and we can do nothing. And the reality of the fact is that those corporations only have power because of us. They only have power because of us. But we have removed ourselves from the negotiating table with them because we have accepted the false premise that we don't get to expect anything from them. Because when we give them our money, they give us a product, transaction closed, and now they owe us nothing. We gave them money, they gave us a product, now it's over. They have no more responsibility to us whatsoever except for the product that they gave us, except that they overcharged us for the product. And us giving them the money in the first place gives them more power, more influence, and so on. And they are having much more, they impose much more of a cost on our lives, on our communities, on our societies, and on the world than the cost of the product that they're selling. And so they have to be held accountable for that cost, and we need to get something back for what we're paying them, the tangible and the intangible.
MashaAllah. Really nothing to add to that point. It just came to my mind. I think that it has to also be understood that this is the way that, the West works, right? Like if we look at for example, the Khalij countries, we know that the economic serves the political, right? And the same, for example, in China, same in, like, mostly in the, opposite spectrum of what we are discussing. Like this is the way how to influence policy, in my opinion, in the Western economies, right? But for example, if we go to even Egypt, right, because I think that has been a topic that Brother Shahid wrote about previously, and we have some Egyptian speakers over here. So, like, how much will you be able to influence something in Egypt when the Egyptian armed forces basically own like 90% of the corporate sector, right? So is this even like, will you be able to influence more if you try to divert from these corporations, from their own, like armed forces owned corporations, or will that just be, useless way to target change? Like, does this approach that we are discussing now apply to every country, or is this really for this, wicked profit-based capitalistic way of, the Western economic functioning, or does this approach apply to every country? What do you think?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about in the global South, or we're talking about in the Muslim world, then this doesn't apply as much, except as a decolonization strategy, as an anti-colonization, anti-imperialist strategy, because we are talking about because like what you said, like with Egypt, or say UAE or Saudi Arabia or any of the other Muslim countries, their local economic sectors are under the power of the government. Generally speaking, the state has not been surpassed by the private sector. The state has full control over the private sector in the Muslim world and throughout much of the global South. Now, America, ironically, will call that corruption. But because they don't do it the way America does it, which is the private sector having control over politics and having control over the government. Obviously, there's corruption that takes place, but it's nothing on the scale of American-style corruption where politicians are bought and owned and serve the private sector. So I don't see it as necessarily a strategy that would be used in the global South against global South companies, but it's a strategy to be used in the global South against Western imperialistic companies, because that's their approach. When they come to our countries, they will try to surpass the power of our governments. They will try to surpass the power of our states and colonize us and subjugate us and subjugate our economies and destroy our companies and destroy our economies. That's what they've done. So it's a strategy very much designed against the imperialistic powers and the OCGFC, which is an imperialistic entity, a collection of financial economic powers that approach the world in a parasitic, imperialistic, colonizing manner. So it isn't something. I mean, the opposite is the case. Actually, the more that we would use this strategy in the global South against Western sort of colonizing companies, the more that will, inshallah, benefit our local companies and build our local economies. But those local economies will continue to be under the power of the state. So then our relationship, the relationship of the public with with governance, will continue to be between the people and the ruler, or between the people and the state, as opposed to people and Larry Fink.
Yeah, exactly, mashallah. And you can see this, from how basically all the international organizations and institutions always, talk about privatizing, right, and sell your state assets, sell your government-owned enterprises, right? Like they're trying to impose their parasitic model onto our countries and try to, subjugate us using their own capital when our model is working for us, right? So, like already their negative approach to our model means that we are doing something good, right? I mean, whenever they criticize something, it means that you are on the right track, right? I feel it's that way usually.
I was about to say that you said now, whenever they say or accuse somebody of something, that's what they're guilty of. And that is because they want to deflect from the fact that they are hoarding the power for themselves and away from the collective, away from the layman, everyday people like you and me. So even though I'm in an African country, my country operates similar or the same as what America does in terms of government and political lobbying and democracy and all that type of thing. So I do understand that it's not just the system, what we are saying will especially be beneficial for countries like my own, where we operate the same way that America operates in terms of government and political lobbying. And it is because they want to deflect. I'm talking about America, when they accuse other countries of corruption in the way that economies are handled, in the way that the country is managed for its citizens, and they accuse that country of corruption or that government of corruption. But the reality is that it is America that is the ones that is not operating to the advantage or what is beneficial for the people.
Thank you very much, Sister Nisa. Yeah, it really, everyone has to, understand the economy that they're functioning in and try to assess objectively whether this or that model applies more, right? And whether you are trying to, whether your shifting of resources will be as a fight against Western imperialism or whether it will be as a form of governance and participating in the decision making. And so that has to be the decision to each where he is. Right? So try to distinguish between these two realities. Brother MG, please.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I agree with Sister Nisa and also Brother Shahid and you as well. I mean, regarding this issue, I'd also like to build on what Brother Shahid said about how in the global South things are operating a bit differently. The government is more involved, and I think for very good reason. I mean, when you talk about Egypt, the IMF, a lot of people were talking about the army has been taking a big role in the economy, and it's been like that for a while. But I don't think this is a bad thing. I don't think this is a bad thing at all. The IMF has been pressuring Egypt to sell the assets that are owned by the EAF as far back as the early 2000s when Mubarak was in power. So, and the reason is because such local economic power offsets the power of the OCGFC, even if it's to a minute degree, even if it's just to an insignificant degree. I mean, during the revolutionary period between 2011 and beyond, the foreign media and the opposition media during that time were using their own media pressure on the EAF for them not to be involved in the economy, because the IMF themselves wanted that too. And even they went as far as to say that even the budget of the military had to be disclosed in parliament. And that is a serious breach of national security given the current given the current climate of the region that exists today, that the army itself anticipated more than 10 years ago. So I'd like to make that point, and thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. And especially like the media that is portraying it somehow, right? Who is it financed by? Again, it's by the corporations, right? So, essentially any critique, either whether it's through the IMF or whether it's through the politics or whether it's through the media, these things in the end of the day, at the end of the day, they are owned by the corporate, right? So whatever critique, is being given by these, huge mega corps, right? So, but just okay, so let's take it a step back, because I think these are very interesting topics, to be honest. But just again to go back to these steps that we can perform somehow, because there was this proposal from Brother Shahid. I think it was in some other video, but if you go to the Middle Nation YouTube, there's a playlist, democratization of corporate influence. So please be sure to go through all of those videos, because they really tackle different aspects of this, and it's very interesting. So feel free to watch those. But there was in one video a proposal for committees, right? To be, like that there would be committees, that would contain like consumers, employees, and shareholders, and that these would try to somehow oversee the corporate political spending. Right, and then these committees would evaluate whether the corporate actions align with the interest and with the values, with the societal impact. Thus, these committees would somehow create a layer of accountability that is not there now. Right. So, what do you think about? What do we think about this proposal? Do you think that this is something feasible? How would we approach it? Like, how would we give these stakeholders a voice in corporate decision making, right? That's what we are trying to do. We said that, okay, consumers, by spending the dollar, they essentially either support this political campaign or this corporate campaign or whatnot. But then how can we try to give this overseeing mechanism, right? Because we need to be part of it, right? Like, if you are going to take our money, then show us how you are spending it, right? So do you think that this method would be something viable, or is there any better ideas that you might have? So please feel free to share.
I think it's feasible. I think it's possible work in the moment you threaten a corporate with what it wants the most, or anything for that matter, and a corporate wants money more than anything else. The moment you like threaten them, not necessarily, I'm not talking about aggressive, I'm talking about if you don't show us what you do with the money that we spend with you, if you are not transparent in what it is that you are doing, and if you are not doing the things that we want you to do, then you won't get our money. And the most important part is that we as a collective will be more powerful. So it's not, yes, we all have that power, that dollars in our pockets, but it can really only work when we all stand together and do it, because that is where our power lies, in making sure that we put the influences that will represent us in those spaces where they can make that change that we want to see with regards to policies. So yes, it is feasible that it can happen. Is it going to happen overnight? Obviously, that's not possible. It will never happen overnight, but it has to start at some point, and it has to start with what is in our pockets and how we spend in the first place. And that also means that we as individuals have the responsibility to educate your neighbor, your mother, your father, everybody else, and speak to them about these things and explain to people why it is that it is important, because it does affect every single one of us. So not just about the money, it's about speaking to other people about making real conscious decisions. Now, you don't have to be some fanatic about it, it's just speak to people about it, and ask them to think critically about how it is that they want to influence something that will affect them as well as everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's certainly feasible to start some sort of a committee, and I think that one of the first things that a committee, or it doesn't have to be one, it can be in any, a committee in one city, a committee in one state, a committee in one area, or several, a coalition of committees under an umbrella, all dedicated to this concept. And the point here isn't necessarily that, how can I say this? Like, okay, one of the first things that you would actually have to demand from a company that you're targeting is their consumer demographics data. Who is their target consumer demographic? So we need to get that information from them, so that then we can go to those demographics and try to organize those people along these lines, along the lines of basically as a constituency. The same way that it works in party politics is the same way it has to work when you're dealing with corporations. You have to organize, just like the Democrats or the Republicans have their, Bible belters. The Democrats have their so-called minority groups, younger people, and so on, and they do voter drives with those particular people in those particular neighborhoods and communities to try to mobilize people who they know are their core demographics. So we have to be able to identify who are the core demographic consumer constituents of this or that company, so that then we can do drives to organize those people to influence or to pressure this or that company, whichever company has been targeted. Now, again, as I'm not sure if I said in this video or another video, or probably I've said it more than once, these are small steps that have to be taken, but they are significant steps, because they're steps in a direction that we haven't gone. And there will absolutely be opposition, because they know perfectly well where this kind of a movement can lead, which is the complete dissolution of their unaccountability as power entities. So there will be, just like, for example, with the boycott of Starbucks. Let me just talk about that for a second. The boycott of Starbucks. They've had to close 50 outlets in Malaysia, because the boycott in Malaysia against Starbucks has been airtight. So they've actually had to close 50 different outlets already in Malaysia. I don't know worldwide how many they've had to close, but I just saw a statement by the former CEO, Schultz, saying that basically they're at critical mass now. They've reached the tipping point. Starbucks has reached the tipping point as a result of the boycott. So you have to ask yourself rationally, why are you insisting on this position? You're destroying your company. It's a very easy thing for you to do, to come out in favor of the Palestinian cause. It's a very easy thing to do. And I personally can't understand, or it doesn't seem to me that Starbucks' core demographic consumer constituency, are rabid Zionists. I can't see that. When Starbucks in the past has come out in favor of the LGBTQ and so forth, they tend to be I would imagine that their core constituency tends to be more on the left. So it makes no sense to me why they are so stubbornly defiant on this, except for the fact that they absolutely refuse to be pushed to accountability to the public. They're taking a stand not about Palestine, not about Gaza, not about Israel, not about Zionism, but they're taking a stand about corporate unaccountability, and they refuse to budge on that, even if it means the death of their company. They'd rather die than be held accountable by the public. They'd rather their company be destroyed than actually be responsive to the public interest and to the values of the population. These companies, these private sector power, absolutely refuses any degree of accountability that they themselves are not dictating. You know, they came out with social responsibility and all that, corporate social responsibility. Well, they made that up. They did that. And like when Starbucks was in favor of LGBT, no one pressured them to do that. They did that. It was a pandering move on their part. Anything that they're not initiating, they don't want to budge. They don't want to be dictated to by the public. They don't want the consumers to feel the power that they have, even if it means the death of their company. So the only thing that I can understand from Starbucks is that they're taking this very intransigent position, this self-destructive intransigent position, because they're willing to die on the hill of corporate unaccountability, of private sector unaccountability, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But so small steps have to be made, but each one of those small steps is significant and game-changing steps. So don't minimize the importance of, for example, starting a committee where we're asking for, say, your political donations or financial transactions. We want disclosure about this, disclosure about that. The point isn't necessarily the ultimate point. The end goal isn't the requests that we're making. The end goal is to create a new paradigm whereby the private sector will be held accountable and does have to deal with the population in a quote unquote democratic manner.
Thank you, brother Shahid. Like, subhanallah, as you said, like it's exactly like this ego, corporate ego, right? Where they basically, it's like really, one cannot think of a reason why they do not just denounce it, even though like they denounce that they do not have any affiliations, right? That that they have no financial ties to Israel or Zionist causes, or neither the corporation nor the CEO that you mentioned, Schultz, or what's his name, right? That they haven't supported any initiatives, but like, subhanallah, I think what this demonstrates that even the perception of a corporate affiliation, right? Like even people, they have not seen any specific reportings and specific financials where they would see a connection between Starbucks and Israel, but just that it's being spoken about, it has a severe economic and even reputational consequence, right? Which is, I think, very interesting that even just giving this narrative has an influence. You don't even need to see the specific facts or the specific, as I said, reportings or financials of the given company and try to see the link between Israel and, the company, but just because it's being spoken about, it already negatively impacts them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Starbucks is a really important case, actually, because the actual sort of data about their connection with Israel is not that convincing, but it doesn't matter. And this is why it's the boycott of Starbucks is a perfect test case for corporate accountability to the population, for the democratization of corporate influence, because when I'm talking about this, I'm not just talking about we don't want your company to be involved with us, and so we want your company to reflect our values, period. Because you are a powerful, rich, powerful entity in the society. We are familiar with you. We patronize you. We have a connection between us, between the public and you. And therefore, we want you to take stands that we take. So whether you are connected to Israel or not, it doesn't matter. We want you to be pro-Palestine. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, if you are giving money to to Israel, to the Zionists or not, if Howard Schultz is giving money to the Zionists or not, that's not even the issue. The issue is we're pro-Palestinian. We want you to be pro-Palestinian. So be pro-Palestinian. That's really what corporate democratization is about. It's not necessarily about whether or not this company is involved in such and such activity or not. It's the fact that you are a powerful political private sector entity that we have empowered with our patronage, and therefore you need to take the same stance that we take, whether you're involved in that issue or not. We want you to take the same stance that we take, whether you have any particular business connection or affiliation or not. We want you to take the same stance that we take. So I think Starbucks is the perfect case. And this is, I think, as I said, I think this is exactly why they are refusing, because they don't want to be dictated to by their own customers. They don't want to be dictated to by society. They think that they should be unaccountable. They think that they should exist be able to act in a sort of zero gravity moral zone where all we have to do is provide people with coffee, way overpriced coffee, and everyone should be happy. And no one should ever ask us anything. No one should ever hold us accountable morally for anything. All that we have to represent for our customers is their love for pumpkin spice lattes. And you've minimized the importance of your customers and the depth of your customers. That things matter more to us than that. Things matter more to your constituents than that. But we are the ones that have to show them that more things matter to us than the foam on our cappuccino.
Yeah, exactly. Inshallah, I also have some points related to Starbucks because I think it's a much deeper topic. But please, brother Omar, feel free. I think your hand must be hurting you from how long you have been having it raised.
Yeah, so I was talking about, I was trying to address the question regarding the measures that can be taken to address, holding corporates accountable. And I think one of the basic measures is that people take it for granted that they should call politicians whom they endorsed and ask them for favors in exchange for endorsing them. So that the same thing should happen with corporates, right? So, for example, the very basic steps, which is to get the emails for the executives of this or that corporate, address them, send them emails and tell them that we are your constituents, we are your demographics, we have the numbers for your sales in this or that region, we have your numbers for the sales for this or that core demographic constituency, and we can mobilize and we can drastically lower your numbers, we can drastically lower your sales if you do not comply to our values. So people usually don't think of this as a valid approach or think that the executives don't read their mails or that they won't care, when in reality, if executives receive enough of these messages, whether they're emails or SMSs or what have you, in this day and age of technology, they will feel very frightened. So we've been talking about how the corporates are behemoths and that they are those large structures, those transnational, very super rich structures. But in actuality, they can be very vulnerable because at the end of the day, they depend on our money. So if we are able to communicate with them, and it's not that hard because we can get access to their email addresses, we can get access to their numbers, we can get access to means of communication with them, and tell them that we are very eager to mobilize, then I don't see how that will not help in holding them accountable. Also, we have to convince the consumers that their dollars can go in many ways, not just in the ways of boycotting. So if you boycott, this is a good step, and it's a very valid step, and it's a very effective step. But even an even more effective step would be to endorse campaigns, media campaigns, because PR is very important. We can use those dollars to endorse media campaigns to convince those companies, to convince those corporates in the other direction. So we have to use their own tools. We have to use their own weapons against their power. I'm not suggesting, as Brother Shahid has already mentioned, that we try to destroy them, to destroy those corporates. That's not the case. But we have to be on the same field. We have to use the same weapons. We can't go into a gunfight with knives. So we have to use media, PR, because both are very important and both are employed by the corporates. So we cannot enter this battle of power imbalance without using the same weapons. The final point to make is that Brother Shahid had a very good point regarding the fact that we don't have to settle for the corporates not supporting Israel, and that we have to force them to support Palestine, which was the core issue with Starbucks regarding the LGBTQ, for example. Because for a very big time, if you remember, we've already mentioned at the start of the talk that corporates, they especially Western corporates, they tend to create their markets. They tend to create the need for the consuming of their products. So you don't have to be a genius to know that when they say that Starbucks says that we support the LGBTQ, for example, is that they are enacting policies that will ultimately benefit the big pharma companies, for example, which means that for a very big time, those Western multinational, national companies are forcing their values for the sake of profit, of course, on us. So a very valid approach would be to have our own values, to not have their values dictated upon us, but in the other way around, is that we have to tell them that this is not the way we live, this is not the way we eat, this is not how we drink our coffee, this is not how we do stuff in life in general. And it has to be communicated in many various ways, as we have mentioned before. So the fact that values come from them, not from us, the direction has to be changed, because we are the consumers. We should be able to dictate what we like and what we don't like, not the other way around. They seem to think that they can tell us what we like and what we don't like, while in reality, we are the consumers. We determine what we like and what we don't like, especially in the global south. So I hope I didn't take too much time, and thank you so much.
MashaAllah, you said it perfectly, Brother Omar. Thank you very much. Please, Brother MG.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what Brother Omar said. I mean, at the end of the day, the decision comes down to us. What we invest with our money and our profits is what we get. And also, at the same time, there's going to be companies that will try to try to stay on their own positions until they fall to their own knees, as what Brother Shahid said with regarding to Starbucks. But I mean, especially with Starbucks, some companies are built to be more than just companies, and this is something we have to understand, is that there are companies like Starbucks that are built to be, that are designed to be not just a company that makes profit, but to promote a certain culture and the state of mind and the way of life. So this is something we have to be wary of. As what Brother Shahid said, Starbucks usually appeals to the left wing and leftist base in the West, which is pro-LGBT. But then why are they still Zionists till they fall to their knees? I mean, perhaps maybe they are also appealing to the left-wing Zionists as well. So there's a interesting video that there's a YouTuber. I will actually put the link on the comment. He talks about Starbucks. Of course, it's in Arabic. So if you're not an Arabic speaker, I'm really sorry. He doesn't offer interpretation. Maybe you can use AI for that. But he offers a good breakdown on that, and on what the real purpose of Starbucks and the companies that are like Starbucks. So I will post this video after or during the live on the comment section if you are willing to explore it further. Thank you very much.
Yeah, brother, you're right, and I actually talked about that initially when the boycott started against Starbucks in Malaysia, because another way of saying what you're saying is that Starbucks is admitting that they don't have the best coffee. When they say it's actually about a lifestyle, it's actually about a culture, it's actually about an ambiance. It's a way that it makes you feel about yourself. It's something about your own self-image to walk around with your Starbucks cup and so on. It's how you feel about yourself and how you think others will perceive you. This is another way of saying we know that we can't really exist on the basis of the quality of our coffee. So we have all of these intangible things that we offer. It's the same as with a luxury brand. What you're like a Gucci bag or something like that. It's not actually in substance any better than any other bag, but it makes people feel a certain kind of way about themselves, and they think that they are perceived in a certain kind of way, that they're rich, that they're like for Malaysia and in this region, Starbucks in this region, local people who go to Starbucks in Malaysia tend to be sort of having a colonized mindset, and that they think it makes them seem very Western to go to Starbucks. It makes them seem affiliated with Westerners, and that they're more educated, that they're richer, because obviously if you can spend that much money on a cup of coffee, then you're rich and you're privileged. So I'm putting out this image to the world. But this is also their, as you're alluding to, this is also their weak point. Because if your business is based on the perception people have of you by being a patron of that business, then if the perception of you being a patron of that business changes, like it has in Malaysia, well, you're looked down upon now if you're walking around with a Starbucks cup in Malaysia. This means you're a sellout. This means that you're pro-Zionist. This means you're anti-Palestinian. It means you're anti-Muslim. it means you're pro-genocide. So at the end of the day, if the actual quality of your product isn't that great, and it's based on all of these other intangibles, well, those intangibles are all determined by the public. Whether or not we decide to value those or not, it's all determined by the public.
Absolutely, 100% agree. It really has a lot to do with targeting the psyche of patrons. A sort of playing on their self-esteem issues when it comes to when you buy this product. Like Brother Shahid said, if you're walking around with this whatever Louis Vuitton bag, whatever it is, it's not any much better than any other bag that's probably less than a quarter of its price, and people are willing to spend or overspend on these things, knowing that they are spending or providing 300% profit to these corporations. Now, if those people just change their mindset, the video mentions, we're not asking these corporations to change their prices, but what we are asking are the people that are buying these things, change your mindset and hold those same corporations accountable. Force them to change their values, force them to align with the right causes, but not just to hit your corporate social investment or CS responsibility strategy, not just for that, but it should be something that is fundamental to a society, that is not just another profit-making, endeavor where somebody else is now going to make money in a different way. It should be something that really makes a difference within society. So, and that has to do with marketing, or where you play on these people's psyche, on the insecurities, where this handbag is supposed to make you feel on top of the world. You now class higher than what you were yesterday when you didn't have this bag. Imagine that type of self-esteem issues that you have, that you think that your value is equated to an overpriced handbag. Now, when society, when we rethink about the decisions that we make and how we want to change the way that we live and the things that we want to put out there in terms of the goals and how we want to show up in the world, when they make that change, they will also realize that the way that I spend my money is critical to their own or your own way of life. And it's really important that people understand this is a psychological thing. It's colonization of the mind, and it's something that you can't even see. You don't even know that you're going through it. But it's a sad thing, because you base every single decision on something that is, like Brother Shahid said, it's intangible. It's not even providing any real value to you, but you think there's value to it. And it's sad. So important that people change their mindset when it comes to the way that they make their purchases.
And exactly, this brings us to the interconnectedness, right, that we spoke about at the beginning, right? This psychological state, like that the culture remains even when you are away from your slave master, right? Like, the Starbucks coffee shop is exactly the onions that Bani Israel wanted, in the desert, right? Instead of manan salwa, right? Like, if we can compare it that way, like, it's not just a coffee shop, right? It symbolizes something, right? It symbolizes this. It even symbolizes, in some degree, in my opinion, to be honest, this Western corporate dominance, right? The American influence. That's why even people are rejecting it, right? They're rejecting this American global imperialism, right? They don't want to be part of it. And I think this is very important point because, this is from the perspective of the corporations. As we said, when they're giving you an overpriced product, they're betting exactly the value added for you is the feeling that you're getting, right? It's not even about the product. Like, you don't care which material it's made from, whatever, these Rolex watches probably are not worth $40,000, right? But, you feel good about yourself and you can show off and take pictures on Instagram, right? So you're gonna pay it, So I think that the image associated with a brand is something that we can target, right? Like, it's not even about searching for specific financials or these connections of the money and who are they financing, if it goes to the military industrial complex and whatnot. But there is very much this, exactly as Brother Shahid pointed out this point, right? Like, now when you are going with a Starbucks cup, right, you are, pro-genocide, you are complicit in a genocide, you are supporting Israel, you're against the Palestinians, you're pro-killing babies, all of these things, right, that we associate with it. So I think that if we want to somehow target, the brands to be able to influence them somehow, like, it's not about, creating a smearing campaign and coming up with stuff that are not real, but it's a very big part of it, not just influencing how the money goes, how the money flows, etc. But what is the image associated with owning that thing, right? It's a very psychological aspect to this thing that we are discussing, right? I don't know. I think it's very important in my opinion. I don't know what you think, but like this, what are you connected with, even if it doesn't have a base, but it's something that we can make use of, right? Because the people want to be viewed somehow when they buy this or that brand, right? So if you change the way how they perceive, the ownership of that thing, it will have a great impact.
Well, it's introducing a new dimension into consumer choices. It's introducing a new dimension into capitalism, and ultimately, this will be a greater for competition. It's because, I mean, if you think about it, if without this factor being there, capitalism, the way Western capitalism runs, I mean, when you don't have, for example, a cap on how much profit you're allowed to make, say. I'm not that I'm advocating that, but when you have it a situation where a company can make as much money as they can possibly make, and there's no cap on that, then it's monopolistic in nature. Every company has the incentive to try to get bigger and bigger and bigger until they dominate completely. I mean, they're driven by the desire for market domination. They're driven by the desire to become monopolistic. But if you introduce into consumerism morality and values, aside from monetary value, aside from materialistic value, actual values, well, then this in and of itself creates a different dynamic to where, for example, people have said with regards to the BDS movement or with regards to boycotts generally, well, how are we gonna boycott Microsoft, for example? How are we going to boycott some of these companies that are so big that there's no competition for it? There's no alternative for these. So this drives the potential innovation and entrepreneurship and creation of new companies that will reflect the values of the population or of their core consumer constituency. The creation of new industries, new companies, new corporations that will be responsive, so that it's a demand by the population for alternatives. Like, again, just going back to Starbucks, there's been a kind of a renaissance for local coffee shops in Malaysia. There's so many local coffee shops now that are doing so well because everyone is boycotting Starbucks. And I think that even if Starbucks were to take a positive stance now with regards to Palestine, people still won't go to them because they've already found so many better alternatives where the coffee is genuinely better and they just genuinely feel better about supporting local companies, local businesses. So this in and of itself is something against monopolization, and it's actually pro-competition. It's actually completely consistent with capitalism and free market, where we're supposed to have more alternatives. We're not supposed to be stuck with the company gets to do whatever they want because there's no alternative for the product that we need. So this actually drives that. As I said, in Malaysia, 50 outlets of Starbucks have had to close. Well, obviously that means a lot of people have lost their jobs. So how is that correct? How is that moral? We're hurting people because most of the people in Malaysia who work for Starbucks are obviously Malaysians. Most of them are Malays. Most of them are Muslims. Most of them are themselves pro-Palestinian. And now they're out of a job. So how is that moral? We're harming our own people. But think about it in another way. If you're going to take that as your position, then you have to shop everywhere. You have to be a patron of every single company, every single shop, every single store, regardless of whether you need their product or not, regardless of whether you think the quality, the product is of a good quality or not, because now you're responsible for everyone else's jobs. Not that the company is responsible for everyone else's jobs, of the jobs of their employees, making sure that their business stays up. But the thing is that you don't think about it this way because you're only thinking about it in terms of the material aspect of it and the products and the services that a company sells, because you've never thought about it in terms of their moral responsibility to the society. So you don't feel bad when a company goes out of business because nobody liked their products. You don't think that you have harmed now their company or their employees and forced them out of business because you refused to buy a product that you didn't need or a product that wasn't necessary for your life. You don't feel bad about that. You don't feel a moral responsibility for the employees that lost their jobs when a company fails because they failed to meet the needs and the demands of the market. Well, that's just capitalism. But if you include the dimension of morality and values into the equation of whether or not a company can survive in the market, well, then the responsibility for that also rests upon the employer. It also rests upon the company itself. And therefore, if they are not responding to the moral needs and the moral demands of the market, the same way that they would fail if they don't respond to the material needs and the material demands of the market, well, they'll fail if they refuse to respond to the moral needs and the moral demands of the market. There's no difference. So, in fact, the responsibility is always going to be with the company to respond positively to the demands of the market. And if the market is making moral demands of the company, then it's just the same as if they were making materialistic product or service related demands of a company. You understand what I'm saying? If a company can't provide a product or a service that the market needs, well, it will fail. And the same should be the case if the company can't provide for or respond to the moral demands and the moral needs of the market.
Yeah, mashallah. Nah, to be honest, like in relation to the Starbucks thing, it was just what we mentioned, right? This whole image, the public opinion associated with it, that I think that it's not just about the product that they're giving you, but it's this whole, thing that we spoke about. So, alhamdulillah, I think we managed that. But exactly, I also think that you greatly highlighted now the last point that was on the agenda about this balance between. It's also interesting, as you said, now people are buying the coffees from all of these other stores. Of course, it might mean that they are, hiring people. So yeah, why not leave Starbucks and go work in a place that you're supporting your local community, right? Where you're being treated as, part of this, maybe even family sort of establishment. You get better. You're not just a minion in this whole multi-million worker, type of corporation globally, where you are just one in a million again, right? But usually these smaller coffee shops, they're owned by some smaller family, some local, and it gives you even a sense of inclusion into the society that you're in, right? So I think that exactly, like, it's just a shifting of the force, right, from one place to the other. Sorry, Sister Nisa, so you raise your open your speaker up, so please.
I just wanted to touch again on the fact when we spoke a little bit earlier about the perception of value when it comes to buying goods, where especially these overpriced goods, and that, as we mentioned, has a lot to do with their way of thinking and the perception from society. But that also tells you, if people are willing to spend so much money on these goods, whatever it is, because of perceived value, and that has a lot to do with the fact, because it's peer pressure. It also means that when people are also starting to speak about value-based purchases, real value-based purchases, that they're psychological, that it can also shift into the minds of people and shift the way that they think about making purchases. So it is coming back to your question about, is it feasible in terms of the collective and in terms of society? Yes, it can happen. Like the shift from drinking Starbucks to now going to local based coffee shops where people are making those conscious decisions. Yes, it is feasible, because they've seen their peers doing these things. They are being affected by what your neighbor is doing and what your grandmother and your aunt and your sister and those type of things. Word of mouth is important. So like those same brands are using word of mouth and using peers to influence your purchasing decisions, the same can happen in reverse.
Yeah, thank you very much, sister. To be honest, I think like we managed, alhamdulillah, to cover all of the aspects that I wanted to, share with you. But I think that our listeners need to, realize that this global reaction to the Zionist regime and its actions, right, and the boycotts, like really highlight a significant shift in the understanding of the global population. Even it gives a sense of vulnerability to the corporations, right, that really must now navigate a complex landscape, right? That public approval now, it really extends beyond some just brand loyalty, right? We, as a consumer, as consumers, we demand justice, we demand human rights, right? True human rights. We demand these collective values that we share. And we can see that the streets, the university campuses, the masajid, private homes, they have really become the final arbiter, right, of a corporation's success. So, all of these business deals, the mergers, the expansions, they can receive approval from shareholders, from the governments, from banks and whatnot, but they will all fail without public backing and, the consumers' dollar bills, right? So I think that this movement that has been really gaining traction and speed and momentum, like it underscores some need for corporations to recognize that they really exist by the good grace of the pipe. It's not a given. So, and I think they are beginning to realize this, right? So, like even there was a video about the Balenciaga example where public opinion can really make or break, like the most successful companies. So ignoring consumer demands is no longer a viable strategy, right? So the days of corporations acting as, these unaccountable power entities are inshallah over. And we have to, as consumers, realize that we really wield more power than we actually realize, right? So by withholding our money and choosing where and how we spend it, we can really demand accountability and reshape, inshallah, corporate behavior. So also realize that these boycotts of Western brands over the perceived genocide, they are really more than just a political statement, right? We are really trying to reassert our power as people, as consumers, over these corporate and economic structures that they impose upon us, right? We really trying to expose the emptiness, the hollowness of the products that they claim, the quality through these logos, while we know that they really just symbolize oppression, injustice. So, we really demand that profit be tied to ethics and that the companies reflect the values of the communities that, the communities that are holding them, right? So as Brother Shade said, the message is really clear. Without any moral value, there is no market value, right? So Western companies specifically must, evolve to meet these demands or watch as their market share erodes, right? And especially in the markets of the global South. So yeah, this is not just some consumer revolt, right? But it's really a struggle against this corporate imperialism and economic colonization. I think in one of the latest videos, right, or in the live stream, it was really mentioned like we need to understand this economic colonization, right? That's the source, and this is really a way of how to get rid of that, inshallah. So yeah, we as consumers always demand, as Muslim consumers especially, right, justice, accountability, dignity. So we should make the corporations understand that we understand how things are, right? Because they're playing us for fools. We need to understand that the privileges that we are giving them can be withdrawn at any given moment if they do not do what we want them to do, right? So I hope that this has been beneficial for you, right? Because this is a movement that we are all part of. We are all consumers. We all buy things, right? We just, inshallah, need to become more organized, try to fight for these structures. The proposal that we spoke about, about these committees, inshallah, if you are able to in your own, communities. Yeah, please, Brother Shahid.
No, just very quickly, I wanted to say you misspoke now for a moment. You said perceived genocide, talking about corporations, and I think what you meant to say was perceived complicity in genocide. I just wanted to sort of correct that quickly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I just wanted to say right in closing, although this topic actually has a lot more to talk about than we've been able to cover, to be honest, especially in terms of tactics and strategies. But I wanted to emphasize also that it doesn't have to only be punitive. We're not just talking about boycotting or disrupting corporate commercial operations or whatever, but the really essential aspect of it is also rewarding companies that do the right thing with our dollars, with our patronage, with our shopping, and so forth. So, I mean, another aspect. I don't mean to bring a whole another dimension to this at the close of the session, but I mean, if you have a committee that's dedicated to corporate democratization, and you're targeting a particular company, you should also try to focus on having the ability, organizing the ability to be able to literally mobilize shopping sprees for those corporate constituents, so that for the commercial constituents of a particular company, so that if they do the right thing, you can also tell them that if you take the stance that we need you to take, we can guarantee you a significant inflow of profit, a significant spike in your revenue, because we can mobilize consumers to actually patronize your business. It's very important, I think. They're motivated by profit. So we can't only always take the punitive approach of denying them profit, but also the ability to give them greater profit if they do the right thing.
MashaAllah, brother. Sorry that I misspoke before. Of course, I hope that our listeners already know my stance regarding these issues. So it was just a mistake on my part. So I apologize. Yeah, okay. So please, if our speakers, anybody wants to add something, Brother MG or Sister Nisa, yeah, Brother MG, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, to build on what Brother Shahid has said, is that maybe one way we can do that through for implementing rewards is through some sort of cap and trade function for reward and consequences. I think boycott. If you guys know the application that BDS has collaborated with, they are doing something similar when, for example, if you search in the application for a product and you find out it's boycotted, they would show you the alternatives. So it redirects you basically based on your interest to an alternative that is more aligned with the Palestinian cause and with the values that pertain to the Palestinian cause. So maybe some sort of cap and trade function that can be implemented, but at a more on a more wider scale, or more scale up, as we say.
Yeah, and I would just to sort of continue on that topic. There's an element that used to be the case in boycotts. For example, back in the day in the Montgomery bus boycott, for example, during the civil rights movement and so on, which I think is largely missing from modern boycott movements. I think, as far as I know, I'm not that familiar with the BDS leadership and what their approaches have been in terms of interfacing with corporations. But an element that really must be there is that you do have to, you have to approach your boycott movement or any sort of strategies or tactics that you use for the purpose of corporate democratization. You have to approach that with a negotiating mindset and look at it as a form of dialogue with that company. We're not just trying to hurt you. We're not trying to harm you. We're trying to get you to do the right thing. So that includes that you should interface with them. You should talk to them. You should try to have a meeting with them and discuss with them, what are your concerns? What is holding you back? Like, for example, like what I was talking about with Starbucks. What possible rationale do you have for not aligning with the global consensus on Palestine, with not aligning with international law, with not aligning with the ICC and the ICJ? What possible reason do you have? Tell us. Let us know what your concerns are. What is holding you back from being pro-Palestine and from making an explicitly clear statement, a pro-Palestinian statement, which will obviously be a huge boost for your business, and also is just the right thing to do. So you should approach it not in an adversarial way, but in a mentality of negotiation and discussion, where we want to talk to you and help you to come to the right decision, to help you to take the right stance. And we need to know what your concerns are. What's holding you back from taking the right stance? What is the outcome that you're predicting, the negative outcome that you're predicting, that will result from you taking the stance that we're asking you to take? And then we can help address those concerns. It has to be dealt with in a way of mutual respect, in a way, to where we don't just see ourselves as outsiders who are outside of the process, and all we can do is protest and complain and have grievances that we shout in the street or what have you. We need to actually be in the corporate boardroom and talk to you, and because we're serious representatives of the resource that is giving you business in the first place. So actually we deserve a place at the negotiating table, not just metaphorically, but actually at the same table across from the CEO of Starbucks, and discuss this with them, whether it's Starbucks or any other company. It has to be dealt with in a serious manner, not just in a symbolic way.
Yeah, this is really a great point. To be honest, like that it can be a mutually beneficial relationship, right? Exactly, like not be just negative and we're boycotting and we want you to go bankrupt, right? But hey, here we have our proposals, how you can correct your way, what are you afraid of, exactly all of the things that you just mentioned. So I think this is really interesting mindset that one should have when approaching these companies, even if you have just a branch in your own, local community or something in your city, in your, if you collect the consumer database and you know who they are targeting, you can come collectively, maybe pick out a representative for this city, and he will approach this branch and approach it in this manner, right? Okay, we see, you're losing customers. We see you are on the edge of bankruptcy or closure, right? Hey, we can, assist you. These are the steps that the people want you to do. What are your, views of it? Why not? Why yes, etc. So this is really a great tactic, in my opinion, and would be much because when you approach it adversarially, I guess, in an adversary manner, it exactly as you said, sparks this adversary emotion from their side, right? Like this, we are not responsible to anyone. No one will hold us accountable. We can do whatever we want. Right? This is, once you approach it from this negative standpoint, you will immediately, like incite this negative approach from their side, right? But if you try to approach it in a manner that is more about trying to find a way out, they will probably, the corporations and their boards and etc. will be also willing to approach it in a more, intelligent and like less adversary manner. And so I think this is very interesting, inshallah. So yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so with that, I would like to thank all our listeners, all our beloved speakers, Brother Shahid, Brother Omar, Brother MG, Sister Nisa. Thank you very much. And may Allah bless you to be here with us, inshallah, next week again, where we will tackle the anti-Semitism and pro-Palestinian approach, inshallah. So I think that will be controversial and interesting topic from the Muslim perspective to discuss, inshallah. So see you there, inshallah. And thank you once again. Take care and have a nice rest of the weekend.